Welcome to Questrom Live, Insights Live, and the Cicillo Institute for Ethics in the Global Economy webinar series. Cicillo Institute, a part of Boston University Questrom's School of Business, examines issues and explores solutions to global ethical challenges in business. So money, exciting or terrifying? Do you get visions of a $2 billion lottery ticket? Or the billion-dollar company you're about to start or have stock in? Or a dwindling bank account? Or maybe the dollar you gave to a homeless person? Our lives revolve around money, whether we want to admit it or not. We eat, we have shelter, we go to concerts, or climb mountains only because we have something to trade for it. That dollar bill. The back says, "In God we trust." Or maybe it's the Federal Reserve on the front that we trust. We all know what money is, or do we? Where is it? Do you know? Well, luckily, we have Jacob Goldstein here to enlighten us. Jacob is the author of Money, the True Story of a Made-Up Thing, and the host of the podcast, What's Your Problem? For more than a decade, he hosted NPR's Planet Money. Jacob's work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, This American Life, and Morning Edition, and he was a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, the Miami Herald, and the Bozeman Daily Chronicle. He's a graduate of Stanford University and Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, and lives, perhaps inevitably, I think there might be a story there, in Brooklyn with his wife and 2 children. Joining me soon, he's in an Uber at the moment, is Mark Williams, professor at Questrom and a risk management practitioner. He has worked at the Federal Reserve as a senior trading floor executive and bank trust officer. His expertise includes Fed monetary policy, corporate governance, ethics, banking fraud, financial literacy for young adults, and cryptocurrencies. Mark has written for the Financial Times, Bloomberg, Reuters, Forbes, The Globe, and New York Times. His book, Uncontrolled Risk, examines the root causes of the financial crisis and the fate of Lehman Brothers. Mark is also a senior advisor at the Brattle Group. So please use the Q&A tab to address questions to the panelists. I will save time at the end for as many as we can get to. Please feel free to use the chat during the discussion otherwise. So welcome, Jacob.
Hi, thanks.
Thank you. So this is a really fascinating topic. Your book is a great history of money. Who'd ever think that Marco Polo and Kublai Khan would play a role in its development? You also raise the thought that the money system as we know it today may not remain in this form. So I'd like you to just lead us off a little bit by maybe picking a couple of historical highlights shaping the system of money that we have, but really also, what do you mean that money is just made up?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, let me start with that second one, right? I came to thinking about money relatively late in my life. I was an English major in college. My parents were they weren't hippies, but they were sort of hippie adjacent, and so we didn't talk that much about money. I was sort of vaguely wary of it. I knew I needed to have some, but I didn't want to think about it too much. It was really only when I got to Planet Money that I started sort of studying it. And to the extent that I thought about money earlier in my life, I just sort of assumed it was, kind of followed the laws of physics, right? I assumed it was like water or gravity. It was like this thing that existed in the world and was sort of subject to some laws. And what I came to understand as I learned more about it was that's just not true, right? That money doesn't just exist in the world. It's a thing that people made up. And moreover, it's a thing that people have made up again and again in different ways and with somewhat different rules in different contexts. And so that idea that money is not physics, it's not water, it's not subject to some immutable laws was really kind of interesting and big and exciting to me. And so that's sort of the core idea of the book.
And okay, so it's made up. I guess it's in our imagination. So are there things in history that you can point to that are kind of show a really different, we go to banks and we make out loans and we put deposits, and the Federal Reserve says that they're going to take care of us if we lose the money, if, bank goes under or something like that. How is that different than, what happened, 100 years ago or 200 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, there's different moments to look at in that regard. I mean, there's a couple that come to mind. One that's kind of fun, is not all that distant. Money's been around for, depending on how you count it, well, thousands of years, certainly, right? But even if you just go back a couple hundred years, like right here in the US. So if you look at the US in the decades before the Civil War, basically, 1830s, 1840s, it was this very kind of wild moment where, so paper money was around at that time, but as a general matter, it wasn't printed by the government. It was printed by private banks. By that time, in the UK, you already had the Bank of England being this sort of proto-central bank printing paper money, pretty familiar to what we have today. But in the US at that time, it was nothing like that. There was no central bank. There had been a sort of central bank, but then Andrew Jackson hated that idea. Americans in general were very wary of a central bank. So we had this period called free banking, when more or less anybody who wanted to could start a bank and print their own paper money. And, when you say anybody who wants to, who follows a few rules, can print money, a lot of people are going to want to print money. And so we had, for a few decades, thousands of different kinds of paper money circulating in the US, right? All these little banks, little, one-off banks with state charters that existed in some town were printing their own paper money. They might have the picture of the bank president on it, or if it was, if it was a whaling town, they'd put a whale on it, and the Bank of St. Nicholas put a picture of Santa Claus on it. And so you had this really wild monetary world where there were these thousands of kinds of money, which was, raised these sort of simple kind of logistical problems, right? Where if you're, say, a merchant running a store, how do you even know if somebody walks in and gives you a piece of paper with Santa Claus on it that says it's a $2 bill? Is this really money? And there was this kind of fun, really market-based solution to that problem, which was there arose these sort of magazines, these periodicals called banknote reporters that listed every single bank in the country and what every single banknote looked like. So you could tell, is it a real bill? And then they went further, right? Because these are just pieces of paper issued by banks that are essentially IOUs. The idea is you take the paper into the bank and they'll give you typically silver, but silver or gold in exchange for the paper. The paper is just the claim check for the silver. If the bank goes bust and you're holding the paper money, it's not going to be worth anything, right? So these banknote reporters, in addition to telling you what the bill was supposed to look like, they would also tell you basically whether you should trust the bank, how hard it is, if the bank is far away. They would tell you whether you should apply a discount to the value of the currency. So they might say, yes, accept it at par if it's a good bank here in town. They might say, yes, accept it, but knock 10% off the value. Take that $2 bill and give the customer $1.80 in credit, because that's all you're going to be able to get when it's kind of like Forex today, when you trade it in with the banknote exchanger. So that's one example that's not that far away in time and happened right here in the US. And yet, at least on the surface, is really a profoundly different system than the one we live in today.
Yeah. Well, welcome, Mark. Thank
hi.
you.
Hi, Jacob.
Hi, welcome, Mark.
So just on that, maybe I'll bring Mark into this as well. We used to be able to trade it in for gold or silver or whatever. And then now if we go in there, we can't trade it in for gold or silver. So where's the value, and why do we believe that this is one that we can actually use?
Well, Jacob, let me jump in. I'll just give a brief take on this. So if you think about the phases of money, right? The first phase of money was really commodity. And that is, it was more of a barter system. 2 chickens and a duck maybe get you half a cow. And then we really moved to phase 2, which was in the 1800s in particular. You saw that in the railroad industry with scrip, where it was really more as like an IOU, and you could turn it in and you'd get a certain recognition for that. And we even saw that phase 2 period last through the Great Depression, when we started to move off of the gold standard. So no longer could an individual, for example, say the dollar isn't worth much, but they could no longer go into a teller window and exchange it for gold or for silver. So now we're actually in phase 3 fiat, and that's where you may say the money isn't worth anything, but the fact it's legal tender, and as a result, it has to be used for business. Meaning a business can't deny you services or product if you provide them with that dollar. They have to accept it. So I think kind of that's where we are. We're in phase 3. And sure enough, phase 4 is the digital aspect, which is quite exciting. So I'll leave it there, Jacob.
So, okay, we'll move into crypto in just a second, but Jacob, in your book, you talk a little bit about trust and that kind of stuff. Can you kind of give us an idea of why we're so trusting in a government and maybe in our government, and why there's so much trust in other currencies and other governments, and you know, what is it that makes this thing trustable, or you know, that we can kind of believe we're going to be able to get some goods from it?
I mean, well, partly to Mark's point, we kind of have to, right? The government kind of makes us use it. But I do think there's more to it than that, right? I mean, like me before I started paying attention to money, I think most people don't actually think about it that much because it works, right? I think in most times, in most places, money basically works. And then you occasionally have, and that's why people trust it, because they don't really think about it, right? Like most things in the world work most of the time. Buildings don't collapse. We trust that the engineers and the architects and the builders who built them knew what they were doing, but we don't actually think about that. You don't walk into a building and think, boy, I hope it doesn't collapse. I guess I'm trusting the architect. You get paid in dollars and you don't think, oh, I guess I'm trusting the Fed and ultimately really the US economy as a going concern, which is really, I think, what is underneath the dollar. It just functions, right? And so, you know, it's interesting to think in that context, what can cause changes, right? I mean, there's obviously technological change is one piece of it. I think quite often also you have moments of failure. Failure of the system is when you see significant change. I mean, Mark mentioned the Depression. I do think that was the last time we had a great big regime shift. And it is not at all a coincidence that it happened when the gold standard, which was sort of the global monetary regime, was a very significant contributor to the Depression. To an extent people didn't even understand at the time, right? But the shift off of the gold standard, which was this huge historic shift, came because the system really failed. And so I think people basically trust money because it works. And then once in a while it doesn't work and they stop trusting it and something else happens.
Right, and I think the trust was lost clearly when we got to the Great Depression. There was such a run, folks started saying, I want the gold, I don't want the paper. So people were rushing, there were bank runs for the gold, and there wasn't enough gold to support the backing, which had tethered the value of currency to begin with. So it was almost as if the gold standard was that umbrella that you got when it was sunny. And then when it got yanked away, people responded. And sure enough, they responded in hordes to dropping the dollar and getting the silver. So this is, you know, why the trust that is the government, if you believe in the government, they'll honor the obligation. It's so powerful. I mean, let's face it, right, Jacob? You think about the cost of a dollar bill to produce versus a $20 bill. The cost is roughly the same, a few pennies, but yet we as a society say the 20 is worth 20 times more. So it's all about trust.
Yeah, and most money is not even a piece of paper, right? Like most money, and just regular dollars, not even speaking of whatever else, just dollars are mostly just accounts on the ledger at the bank, right? There's not even a piece of paper. It's just nothing at all. It's just a representation of value.
So speaking of nothing at all, I shudder to bring up crypto because of the recent crash and the recent, but it seems like it's exactly what you were just describing, Jacob, before. With any bank can set up a note and put their name on it. It seemed like anybody could set up a crypto and put a name on it, and it's decentralized. So where's the trust? So can you talk about what this thing is? Is it really going to be a future set of money, or is this just a fad, or is this just, not even paper? Before we could say it was paper. Now we could just say it's just bits.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I started covering crypto in 2011, so early. Obviously, I wasn't long crypto at that time, or else I wouldn't be here in a little room, right? I remember though, in the first story, I was doing a story for Planet Money, and we were shocked that the price of Bitcoin doubled from $10 to $20 per Bitcoin. We're like, no, that can't be. And the thing at that time was, at that time, it was this idea of, permissionless digital money. And the basic thought that most people had was, this is interesting. Technologically, it's clearly very clever. And sort of either it will work and be a big deal, or it won't and it'll go away, right? I think the thing that nobody thought was, it won't really work, but trillions of dollars will flow in and people will keep trying to figure it out for 12 years, right? Which is what has happened in the intervening, 11 years, 12 years. And so, one thing that was notable to me over the last few years is people stopped calling it cryptocurrency and started calling it crypto, right? Which, I mean, sure, it's shorter and people tend to shorten things, but I don't think it's just that. Talking to smart people over the last few years, I think many of them stopped thinking of crypto generally, as money, right? It clearly didn't take off as money. It may not ever take off as money, right? And we can talk about central bank digital currencies or whatever, but those don't seem like crypto in the basic crypto sense to me, for reasons we can talk about if you want. So it spread to ideas like with Ethereum, the idea of like, a sort of the digital computer, or trust and kind of other things than money seems to be where the thinking on crypto went, and still is, I think, even through the crash. I mean, I don't know, Mark, is that the way you have seen it?
Well, I think it's fascinating. I mean, I go back to really, the crash we had in 1929 and the movement away from the gold standard. And the movement away clearly was the government needed to step in and provide security to the banking system so they could secure and reestablish to depositors the value of keeping cash in banks. So there was a creation, the government stepped in and created, of course, as you're well aware, the FDIC. The government worked very hard to also reinforce the idea that money had value and we will support it. So I think in times of uncertainty, and that's why I use the umbrella analogy, I think in times of uncertainty, that's when the crypto market got tested. And we just saw that in the last month with FTX. FTX, of course, created its own crypto. It was a private currency, FTT, and they sent it out and said it was worth this valuable amount. We saw, for example, Luna, which, as you know, crashed in June, another private cryptocurrency. So I think what's happening as investors are losing, I mean, the cryptocurrency industry, the market value was $3 trillion just in November, last November, and now it's less than $1 trillion. So I think as people lose significant money, right, because money itself is power and also a lot of emotion are tied with it and pain. And I think people start saying, well, maybe private crypto, whether you call it crypto or cryptocurrency, maybe isn't the right route. In essence, I'm with you, Jacob, in the sense crypto became less of a currency and more of an asset class to speculate. Ultimately, when we think about the US dollar, a $100 bill, we don't like the $100 bill because we can put it on the wall as art. We like it because we can use that $100 bill to buy something that maybe have value and may appreciate in value. So I think, for many, crypto was an asset class, not a form, a medium of exchange. Like, it was a misnomer. It should never have been called currency to begin with. And I think the SEC would agree. The SEC now is saying, hey, this is a security. It's nothing like a currency, so forth. So
yeah, I mean, in a way, like, obviously it's a speculative asset and its correlation with other risk assets is wildly clear at this point, right? In a way, that's like the least interesting part of it to me, right? Like I believe that, the backstory of people trying to invent crypto is great and interesting. And like, they're like big thinkers with these kind of out there world historical ideas and also super smart technical people. And, to your point about 29, like, it is no coincidence at all that the Bitcoin white paper came out in the fall of 2008, right when, after Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, kind of in the teeth of the financial crisis, they call it the Genesis block, the sort of first block of Bitcoin that was ever mined in the sort of early code, you see this, it's sort of in the comments part of the code, a headline from a British paper about a bailout of banks in the UK. Like that is very much tied up with the launch of Bitcoin, and therefore, more generally with cryptocurrency. Like, frankly, to me, like a speculative asset is just not that interesting. You know what I mean? Like it goes up, it goes down, you make money, you lose money. There's not that much to say about it. But yes, to a very significant degree, that's clearly what it's become. I've been waiting and am still waiting just for like the boring but big use case, right? Like I'm old enough to remember when the web came along, and I remember at the beginning it was like, oh, you can kind of whatever, bounce around and look at these pictures. And then a few years in, web-based email came out, right? Hotmail. Hotmail was the first web-based email. And it was a huge deal because email before that was like a hassle, and you had to have an app on your computer. And if you didn't have your computer, you couldn't check your email. And then suddenly you could check your email everywhere, and you didn't have to be into the web, right? It was just this useful thing. And I feel like that's what crypto actually needs, right? It's just like a thing where you don't care about crypto. You just want to, whatever, send money to your family back home or something that is just a thing in the world that has nothing to do with crypto. Crypto is just a useful tool. And we still haven't seen that, right?
Right. And I think the evolution, right? I think the pain and the financial loss has elevated the need to say, well, what is a good use case now? If it is a currency to be used, right? An example would be, for example, and this is why, as you know, stablecoin has really taken off, because that was a substitute and it was a problem that was solved. If we create stability, then we can move in and out of cryptocurrencies in times of uncertainty and have a hedge. But the reality is we've seen these crypto stablecoins have been anything but stable. And as a result, that's also brought it to question what's next. And I think that's why central bank digital currency has a chance, because of the failures we've seen in the private creation of cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
Mark, that's an interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just
David.
on this central bank crypto, what problem is that solving? I guess is the question. I mean,
Well, trust, right? So if you think about why, for example, FTX failed, in particular, its private currency, FTT, failed, and why Luna failed, right? These are currencies that actually lost 99% value overnight. The reason was lack of trust and actually regulation and supervision over the system that was created. So this is where I think, there is now a door opened. I'm not saying central banks will be successful. I know there's over 100 right now across the globe that are either looking at, or for example, like the Bank of Bahamas has created a digital currency course called the sand dollar. So here is an opportunity now that wasn't maybe a month ago because of FTX in particular.
I mean, I'll tell you one thing it seems like a central bank digital currency would be useful for, and it's ironic given the sort of libertarian origins of cryptocurrency. It's surveillance, right? Like there's a reason that China is far advanced in testing a central bank digital currency, and that is cash, paper money, is sort of the last bastion of being able to transact in a significant way without the government knowing what you're doing, right? And China is a surveillance state, essentially. And so if you can make people give up cash and switch from paper money to a central bank digital currency, you can track their transactions much better. Like that to me seems like the most obvious utility from the point of view of a central bank or a government, not necessarily from the point of view of other people.
Right, and you're correct too, Jacob. And the People's Bank of China came out in 2014 and announced that they were looking into this. And a lot of people concerned, you're right, about the surveillance state and what does that mean. 2016, the Bank of Japan came out and said they were working on it. By 2020, the Federal Reserve came out, the Boston Fed in particular, right here in Boston, went with MIT, and they're doing a project called Hamilton, and specifically for a central bank digital currency. So on one hand, you're right, the libertarians need to be concerned. If we go back to your point of the Alpha Block that was first traded in January 2009, that was done in a decentralized platform, and that was to stick it to the man, banks and central banks globally. We don't need the middleman. Now, fast forward to 2022, it looks like so much it's becoming centralized again. If central banks have their way, they are going to centralize a digital currency. And that's actually the ironic part of this whole evolution that we've seen, or devolution, depending on what position you're taking.
Yeah, it winds up being not that different, right? I mean, to me, a central bank digital currency isn't that different. It's not a fundamentally different monetary regime than the one we're in, right? You still in that universe have private banks and you have central banks, and everybody's basically doing the same thing. It doesn't really seem like crypto to me.
Right. Well, the one benefit to central banks in particular, I mean, you talked about the cautious nature of surveillance, but the benefit is the fact that you can actually see instantaneously the transfer of money. Where is it flowing? Where is it sitting? And that can actually help in monetary policy. So instead of having the Federal Reserve meet every 6 weeks for the Federal Open Market Committee, it's 24/7. I mean, that's a whole different level of monetary policy. This could be a new way in which to reduce the chance of bad monetary policy, so we don't have as many, down cycles and up cycles. I mean, there are some possibilities here that could be positive.
I want to go back for a sec. We touched on stable coins sort of in passing, and then we jumped to central bank digital currencies. I mean, stable coins are really interesting in the context of this broader conversation we're having, because, well, for a few reasons. I mean, one, they've been compared to those free banks that I was talking about at the very beginning, when, private banks could print money. In a way, stable coins are more money-like than other cryptocurrencies, more money-like than Bitcoin, right? Like money, Mark, as you pointed out, is not a speculative asset. You don't get $1 because you hope it'll be worth $5 tomorrow by, if you put it under your mattress. That doesn't make any sense. Money doesn't work that way. One of the things that is really striking about things that are money-like, and this happened with money market mutual funds in the financial crisis, right, is they seem really safe, but they actually, on a sort of systemic economic level, can be much more risky than risk assets, right? You buy Bitcoin, you might lose your money. You don't act like your $50,000 Bitcoin or your $20,000 Bitcoin or whatever it is now. $16,000 Bitcoin is going to be worth $16,000 whenever, and act accordingly. The risk comes when a thing that you think is always going to be worth $1 is suddenly not worth $1. Like that's what we saw in the financial crisis with shadow banks and money market mutual funds. I mean, in a way, it's what we used to see with bank runs, right? That's what happened with paper money in the gold standard era before there was federal deposit insurance. Your dollar was suddenly not worth $1 because that piece of paper was issued by a bank that just went bust, right? And that's where you can have these financial crises, basically, where the problem is not constrained to the sort of core actors, right? And thankfully, so far, there has not been a crypto blow up. I mean, one of the interesting things that's happened, one of the things that's been interesting to watch with the blow up of FTX is that it has been constrained to crypto, which is good, right? Which is what we want. People were taking risks, which is fine. We're not opposed to people taking risks. They blew up. Okay, that's what happens when you take risks. The thing we don't like is when it blows the whole economy up. And thankfully, I guess just because crypto is still relatively small relative to the macroeconomy, or maybe just because the linkages, the sort of contagion potential is constrained, we haven't seen it expand. I mean, Mark, I'm actually curious what you think. Like, do you think crypto is just small enough? Like, are you at all worried about contagion from crypto to the broader sort of real economy?
That's a great question. So I look at gold, so physical gold versus cryptocurrency, which some have called digital gold, of course. And the market cap differential is physical gold is 20 times bigger. It's roughly almost a $20 trillion market.
It's amazing, right? You would never
Right.
know it to read the papers or read Bloomberg. You'd never know that gold is 20x crypto.
Right. So that's interesting to me. In regard, I liked your point about stable coins. What we know is all coins aren't stable. And what we learned about Luna in particular and the way it was set up, it was an algorithmic stable.
I mean, that one is particularly sketchy, right? Like
Right.
Tether seems like the interesting one now in terms of like, seems like it's safe, but they're not. They just refuse, the company behind Tether refuses to sort of say exactly what's going on, right? It's very big. I don't know if you have a view on that one.
I do. Well, and actually Circle too, here in Boston is the second largest, as you know, stablecoin. So what's interesting, David, about all of this, it takes us back once again to actually private currencies. if we go back to that phase two I was referring to with scrip, and you had like this backing of an asset, and even the US dollar was backed up to the 30s actually with silver certificates where you could exchange for the physical commodity. That gave us trust and comfort. What these stable coins are doing in particular is they're actually exchanging fiat money for a stable coin, and then they're buying X amount of US dollar to support it, to tether it. And to me, that's a step backwards. We're actually going back to that point of right around where we were with the gold standard. It's a quite interesting way in which to backstrap and get trust. I would argue that it's parasitic, that stable coins themselves are actually relying on the US dollar to get that trust. So if you think about it, Jacob, they're actually relying on the fact it's legal tender, and that's what's giving collateral and support to the value of stable coins. That is ironic.
It's ironic. Well, that's the sort of classic Bitcoin maximalist argument is like the dollar's going to collapse, right? So why would you want to just have dollars in a sketchier, less convenient form? I mean, to me, stable coins look most like money market mutual funds, right? Except they don't pay interest, so kind of a worse deal. But like, or like a bank account before there was a deposit insurance, right? You give them your dollar is always worth $1. And then they're doing something with it on the other side, but that's not your concern, right? It's not your concern until there's a run. Like it's clearly a runnable asset where they're doing, liquidity transformation and maturity transformation. And they don't have a reserve account at the Fed. They're not even just buying, treasuries. They're doing some set of things. And if everybody went tomorrow and asked for their tethers back in the form of dollars, Tether would have to sell some set of assets. And I think what's unclear is like the liquidity and ultimately the value of all of those assets, right? Like that's the core classic sketchy finance thing.
Right. And I think it's going to be a market event that will test the strength or weakness of these stable coins. And they haven't been tested yet. Clearly, FTX and FTT were tested and they failed. So
yes, although FTT was not a stable coin, just to be clear, right? And like Terra Luna was super shady. Like to some extent, we are having that market event right now, right? There has been, I don't know if I'd call it a run, but I saw some chart. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Lots of people have been redeeming their tethers. And there was another moment, right? And there's hedge funds have big short positions on against tether. So like clearly it is withstanding some amount of pressure. Like there's something there. I don't know. It's a little weird.
Isn't the idea of stable coins, though, undo the whole idea of decentralization of currencies? I mean, isn't that one of the base purposes of crypto is that it's not controlled by any one country? If it's stable coin, isn't it just, as Jacob was saying, isn't that just an extension of US currency?
It is.
Yeah.
It is, which is quite interesting.
And typically there's a company behind, the big stable coins, which interestingly is not true of, say, Bitcoin, right? Like one of the really compelling things about Bitcoin is like, it's not pegged to the dollar. There is also no company, right? Bitcoin people sort of make fun of the idea of like the CEO of Bitcoin, right? There is no CEO of Bitcoin. It's just code in the world that anybody who wants to can run, which is like a cool idea. It just hasn't proved useful, I think, in the way people thought it might.
So let me just before we switch gears, I want to switch gears, but there is a question from Jeffrey in the Q&A. It says, "Great conversation, Mark. You mentioned that we're growing, that there is growing understanding that cryptocurrencies are really a security. So why wouldn't my Apple stock be structured as an NFT in the future?"
Well, it is a slippery slope. So, and that's a question, sort of. What is a security and what's not? Regulators are really stepping up just this month, and they need to provide more definition. It's the Commodity Futures Trade Commission as well as the SEC. They need to let us understand what is a security, what's not, and what kind of innovation can be done and what can't. Because at this point, it's still the wild, wild west.
Yeah, good.
I mean, if you take the other side of that question, right? Like, could you put traditional securities on the blockchain, right? I mean, there is, and Mark, you probably know this better than I do, but I feel like there is this weird kind of back office side of stock trading where there's like still paper certificates and there's like some company that actually has custody of shares of stock and, settlement takes, what is it, it's T+2, it takes days, right? After you've traded a stock, it doesn't actually settle for a couple of days. So like, that seems like one of those boring back office potential use cases, same like titles for houses, where like people have said, well, put that on the blockchain. I mean, I think, there's a set of problems, which is there are costs of decentralization, right? And namely, it's very hard to scale. It ends up being slow and expensive, but it does seem like the flip side of that, not let's regulate crypto as securities, but like, can elements of the crypto world make securities, the existing securities world, more efficient? Like, seems like an interesting question. Another one of those places where it's like, could it really work? I don't know.
Right. Well, it's interesting. We have a laboratory here at Boston University, and I teach. Actually, I started the first fintech company class to really develop startups, and we talk about sort of innovations. And this time last year, students were really focusing a lot on starting their own crypto. This year, students are really focusing a lot on blockchain, in particular, the use case for blockchain. The understanding is crypto, such as stablecoins, can provide a tokenization to get in on the blockchain. But the focus is really, what is the application of blockchain? And I think that's a very healthy sort of silver lining for what's happened in the last month or so. I think this whole movement towards, what it should be, and that blockchain is the interesting aspect here, not the crypto. And you actually alluded to it earlier. I mean, whether it goes up or down, crypto, that's not the exciting part. I mean, that's just volatility, that's risk, right? The question is, what is the long-term application of the blockchain, and what is the best case or use case? And there's many.
Maybe. I mean, I'm less optimistic about use cases than I used to be, just because there's been so much money trying for so long and they haven't found it yet.
Well, your point, right? Let's talk about all the profitable companies, not the ones that sold crypto, but really blockchain companies that have been profitable. And it's very hard to name them.
Yeah, I mean, like, to the extent, I guess Coinbase is not profitable. They seem like the closest thing, but they're just making money off of trading, right? To the extent people have made money off of crypto, it hasn't been for providing some useful service to people who don't care about crypto. Also, well, I'm gonna put a stake in the ground and say, I'm gonna guess that your class next year will be focused on AI. If it was crypto last year and blockchain this year, I'm guessing it's going to be AI and finance next year.
Okay, yes. I want to. We can spend, of course, all the time talking about crypto and blockchain and that kind of stuff. I want to get back to money systems a little bit, and related to this. So since we're an ethics institute, I want to turn to the ethical concerns of just money systems. So the current system of private creation of money by banks, and we've seen prejudices and racism in reducing the availability of funds to disadvantaged people. Can we talk about future money systems that might either exacerbate inequality or and leave them worse off, or is there hope for some money system that's going to be more fair for the less advantaged?
Mark, you got something on this one?
Okay.
I didn't mean to stop the conversation dead, but
No, well, this is a big push for the idea of greater inclusion, even in communities like Boston. We have 15% of the Boston communities either under or non-banked. And I'm sure, Jacob, where you are in Brooklyn, there's areas in particular where you just have this immigrant population which feels very uncomfortable with the existing financial system. So how can you reduce the barriers to entry and include them? Clearly, a delivery system like a blockchain-based financial system that reduces the delivery costs and also makes it easier for openness, that's exciting. So that's where I see actually an application and opportunity. And I think that's where the Federal Reserves as well, the research that have been done in the Federal Reserve System from Boston, First District to San Francisco, all agree that there's great opportunity there for inclusion.
I mean, I kind of buy that, but like, I feel like you just threw the word blockchain in there in like if you just have a bank with an app offering a no-fee checking account, that seems like as inclusive to me, and you don't need the blockchain. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like historically, the discriminatory parts of money have not been the fault of money, right? But of the society, of the people deciding who gets the money. And
Right.
whether it's on the blockchain or not, like, I suppose, people talk about, like, if you can sort of, technology should allow you to blind the, say, lending officer to the borrower, right? But again, you don't need blockchain for that. It doesn't have to be on the blockchain if you want to do that. Like, there's a really simple idea this guy at Brookings has been pushing for a while, which is just, to be a bank, in order to issue deposits backed by the FDIC, you have to get a charter from the government, right? Like, more generally, I think it's useful to think of banks not as pure private actors, but as engaged in this sort of public-private partnership, right? Like, Dave, as you alluded to, banks create money. They get this very large safety net in the form of the FDIC, in the form of emergency lending from the Fed. They're subject to a lot of regulation. So banks are really in this kind of public-private partnership, right? So that, like, there's this simple idea, which is, as part of that deal, tell banks that they have to offer just like a very plain vanilla, no fee checking account to anybody who wants it, right? That's just part of the cost of being a bank. Like, that to me is just a super low tech way that would, like, in a pretty straightforward way, increase inclusivity. I don't think you need a monetary regime change to do that. And I don't
Yeah,
even think a monetary regime change would be particularly useful to that end.
Yeah, and what I was referring to when I was talking about the
Sorry, I didn't mean to be glib
No.
about dismissing the blockchain.
No, actually, I was referring to basically Fed research on why, for example, digital currencies, central bank digital currencies could be of great benefit. And we see it in the government level payments that go out to various communities, being able to track those and understand and making sure they're going to the right spot. Whether we're talking about the WIX program or SNAPS program, there's really and that's just in the US. More broadly in communities like India, for example, where just the infrastructure is very hard. It's a rural infrastructure where there's not a lot of bricks and mortar. How do you reach individuals in a low cost way? So, and the reason I throw out blockchain in particular is because it is a good security device in a world where, cyber risk has increased by 20% annually. So that's sort of why I think it's all coming together at that point. I think there's some technologies giving some computing power and accessibility through blockchain, I think is quite interesting.
I mean, there's, in Kenya, it's been more than a decade now. They launched this mobile money system. I'm sure you know of it, M-Pesa. And it basically was like send money via text. And there were these little M-Pesa offices all around, and you could go there and get your actual cash, but people could move the money around just on a flip phone, on an old pre-smartphone phone. And like, that was this incredible breakthrough in a country where a very large percentage of the people, didn't have bank accounts, lived far from a bank. And so I do think there are ways, I think it's useful to separate technological change in money from sort of the blockchain and crypto. They've become sort of paired in the popular imagination, but like, there's a ton of technological innovation you can do to make money work better, to have payments go faster, right? That it still takes days to transfer money electronically through the Fed is ridiculous. Like, sorry, but respectfully, right? Like, it's crazy that it still takes that long. And you can change a lot of those things without the blockchain, including, improving inclusivity.
Right. And I think the Fed deserves some criticism here. The last big payment infrastructure improvement that they did, the last highway they built for financial services, as you know, was probably in the 1970s with the ACH system. So really, there needs to be an upgrade, and long overdue. So,
Mark, do you know why it's taking so long? I mean, we did a story ages ago about that at Planet Money. Like, do you have a theory of why it hasn't happened yet?
Well, I worked at the Fed. I worked in the San Francisco.
So I'm
Fed.
asking you, maybe yeah.
Well, in the Boston Fed, and I would say the Fed moves at a glacial pace.
Yeah.
The cautious nature of the Fed, making sure, because in essence, they are the lender of last resort.
Yeah.
Right. There's so much sort of, we're going to move slowly because we want to make sure we're moving in the right direction. And I think they've been pushed as a result of other central banks around the world, which have moved a lot quicker than the central bank here in New York, in Boston, and San Francisco, and elsewhere.
So can we move to, what do you think the future of money is going to look like? And right now, you could say that the dollar is a world standard. It's it's threatened by our own political system and, you know, in threatening defaults. For a while, it looked like that the yuan was maybe going to be trying to become a world standard. The euro is kind of in the shadows, but maybe it's good because it's not one of the other two. I don't know. And then of course we're looking at crypto. What is the future of money? What is, you know, now let's put on the get the crystal balls out and take a look. With all your history that you've looked at, Jacob, does it point to something that is directionally going?
I mean, you know, one of the striking things to me at looking, you know, at the sort of long historical picture is how much things change over time. It seems like the obvious answer now is crypto, but I don't actually think that. Like, it seems very unlikely to me. I mean, well, on a simple level, that governments are going to give up their sort of power over money, right? Like, and, you know, I suppose there's some universe where the technological change is so massive that governments don't have a choice. I think that was kind of the original sort of Bitcoin maximalist dream. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the governments have a lot of power and are going to keep it. And in terms of, you know, what's the reserve currency, weirdly, the dollar seems more entrenched than ever to me. You know, I mean, China, if it wanted to be a real international player, would have to, I think, and Mark, I'm curious what you think about this, but I feel like China would have to give up a lot of control, right? Like, they don't have a real sort of floating currency. They have capital controls. They have all these rules that give them more power domestically, but in a way, less power globally, right? They don't want to let their currency be like a real floating currency like the euro or the yen. And then the euro has a whole set of problems. So I don't know, Mark, I'm curious what you think.
Well, and then I want to get back to your book because I love how you talk about money at the very beginning.
Oh, thanks, man.
Your book is what I recommend my students read, by the way. And
I only think you should make them read it. That's my only tweak to that.
What was that phrase again? What do you call money? Money is what? Go ahead, say it again.
It's what you pay your taxes with? I don't know.
Okay, well, following up on that. So I think you're absolutely right. There is control with money, of course, power with money. Government sovereigns, they're called sovereigns. The first coin created was called a sovereign coin. That was to make sure that the King of England could get his taxes money back, and that people weren't cutting corners off coins, and that they were of value. So I think governments themselves, it is a monopoly. I mean, in one hand, in my monopoly, I can issue monopoly money. You can say it's not worth much. But on the other hand, I'm allowing you to pay your taxes with that monopoly money. So I don't see that going away. What I do see, though, is the portability. I think increasingly we as consumers want to have portability, and we don't want to carry dollars. We don't even want to carry credit cards. We want efficiency of service. And I don't think the average consumer like you and I, Jacob, even think about blockchain or any other device. We just want convenience. So I see technology pushing for convenience, and that means consumers are going to drive it. I see central banks they will continue to manage monetary policy in the money supply. That's not going to go away. I do see countries coming together a little bit more on monetary policy. I see countries coming together and creating maybe indexes of a basket of currencies. In regard to China, clearly they're a net export country, so they benefit when their currency is weak and they continue to push it. Germany benefits when their currency, the euro, is weak. The US benefits, as we have in the last year, as our currency gets stronger and we can buy more and more for less. So I think those dynamics still exist.
Money is what you use to buy stuff. Was that the answer to the question? Did I miss it? It was the biggest softball question I ever whiffed on.
It's a thing you were saying. You know, I just loved it because you came back from a different angle, and you also talk about buying smart wool socks with it too, and I think that's cool. That's like the best sock ever.
It's a good sock.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a couple of questions that are in the Q&A. One of them goes back a little bit to the ethical questions and disparity. The question is, in increasing financial access, will definitely help. However, is this really the solution to the current financial disparity? Is there other things other than just increasing financial access that we should be looking for?
I mean, you could raise the capital gains tax. I feel like there are always just like boring, simple answers, right? I mean, the capital gains are taxed at a lower rate than income. The argument is you want to encourage investment, and a lower capital gains tax rate encourages investment. Like, I feel like the counterpoint to that is you also want to encourage work, right? And a high marginal tax on labor discourages work at the margin. And like, it's extraordinary when you look at how concentrated capital gains are at the very top of the income and wealth distribution. Like, it's not some intuitive, like, normal distribution. It's like a crazy Pareto curve where like a massive amount of the capital gains are at the very top of the distribution. So like, you know, you could raise the capital gains tax. Like, there are boring things you could do if you wanted to adjust that.
Right. And I think on the other end of that is too, I think access to capital. That is, we've seen lots of reports that show the reason why the disparity gap in wealth between the Black community and the white community being 8 times different in regard to net worth has to do with one simple thing: access to capital, access to the ability to actually get a mortgage, to be able to get a house, to get appreciation in that asset value. And I think that's a simple thing. And so that's outside of the, you know, fintech realm. That's just access to capital. I think the other
Is it simple though? I feel like we've been trying to solve that one, you know, at least ostensibly for 50 years or something. Like, like, I don't know enough about it. Like, I mean, like, how do you solve it? Like, how, like, you can make a rule. We've made a rule. It's illegal to discriminate by race in lending, but clearly we haven't solved it. Like, what? How do you get better at that?
Right. And the simple part is we need to address that. And that is better and more access to capital for populations that otherwise had been under and non-banked. So that is the challenge. Do we create incentives, or do we create regulation to require it? And the latter, as you know, has not worked very well. And that's Community Reinvestment Act and so forth, reducing redlining. All these things have not produced the outcome that we've wanted.
Okay, I have one more question, and then let's see if we can wrap it up. So here's Mark says, I'm of the opinion that China's interest in digital currency is more than just surveillance. They would really like the yuan to be elevated to be the global trading currency. They're thinking of crypto as a means to get a head start. And they can also include the fact that they have the most advanced regulation on digital, in the opinion. If they succeed, will it force the U.S. and Europe to follow, because it will be a decentralized or centralized, or, you know, what's the prospect there?
I mean, Mark, you probably know this piece better than I do, but my sense is, you know, China still has capital controls. They still, as you were saying, whatever, manipulates a loaded word, but they still basically manipulate the value of their currency. It doesn't float freely. And I feel like whether or not they have a central bank digital currency, for them to be like a real reserve currency, right? For some random country to stockpile yuan, or maybe even more importantly, like the wild thing about the dollar, right, is when somebody in whatever, Brazil, is buying anything, lighting, from somebody in China, they don't do it in reals, they don't do it in yuan, they do it in US dollars, right? Like, that is a wild fact that is really useful to the US. Everybody wants treasuries. We get, you know, cheap loans basically from the rest of the world. And I feel like a central bank digital currency alone isn't going to be enough to sort of flip China into that position that the dollar is in. I mean, what do you think, Mark?
Well, I agree with you from a perspective of trust. That is, a central bank has to be trustworthy. And I would actually question what the motives are of the People's Bank of China and what they can do. And at a minute's notice, can they control the servers? Obviously, these stablecoins are going to sit on their servers. And what happens if you have a political regime change? Or if you want to take financial, you know, if you want to enact financial harm to the US, and you find that many investors from the US own this currency, that's a wonderful way of enacting that. So I think there's a bit of game theory involved with all of this. I don't see China taking on that role, or at least a market widely accepting it.
Yeah, okay. Oh, well, thank you. We're running into the end. I think what I'd like to ask each of you to do is just kind of wrap up some thoughts and kind of what do we tell our next generation about what currency is going to be and how to deal with it, especially in these multiple systems of currency that we're now seeing. So if you each take a minute, just your thoughts and any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with.
I mean, I do have kids, so like, and they know I wrote a book about money, so it is a thing we talk about. You know, and they even know kind of about cryptocurrency. Like, I don't think the sort of basic lessons about money are any different now than they were when I was a kid or, 20 years before that. I think the sort of simple things of like, you need to have enough money to buy what you need, but you shouldn't let it control your life. Like that kind of balance is actually more interesting to me as a say parent, like not what is the technological change, what is the next monetary regime, but more the sort of touchy-feely side. How should we feel about money? Like, don't be afraid of it. Spend less than you make. Maybe the most important thing, if I want to teach my kids one thing about money, it's just spend less than you make.
I think those are great points too, Jacob. I would actually add two things. I would build upon the financial literacy side. That's extremely important. The relationship that you have with money. So it's your financial health. We see it in just how you deal with debt, how you deal with income, how you deal with investing. Do you understand your risk tolerance? These are things that are not taught in our schools, and they need to be. Many countries outside the US in particular teach this and provide better assistance to their population than we do in the US. So I think financial literacy and improvement of that is so key. We lost a lot as banks moved away from providing financial literacy within our local communities and in schools as well. The second part is the exciting thing about money. Money is emotional. Money is power. Money is a means in which, though, to not just earn or spend, but also do good as well. And I think the fourth stage of money is allowing technology to improve upon it. And what will that look like? I don't think Jacob or I really know what that'll look like, but I think understand that money used to be leather, it used to be bark, it used to be even stone tablets. So what is money going to look like in the next 10 years? I think the one thing we do know is it won't be big wallets with your uncle pulling out $20 bills for your birthday. It's going to be something that's much more digital, and who controls it, whether it's private or public. I think regulation is going to be more involved in this process. But again, it's going to be exciting. So, and I commend you, Jacob, for your book, because I think it really opens up a door and a discussion in a different way, which is extremely important. I think part of financial literacy is really doing exactly what you've done and the dedication you've spent in writing books like this.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, both of you. Yeah, that's that book was it fun? It's called Money: The True Story of Made Up Thing by Jacob Goldstein. So I want to thank both of you. This was a really interesting conversation. I think that the last couple of comments of what do we tell our kids? I think I like that we talked about Bitcoin as a security, or crypto as a security rather than a currency, but that certainly gets confused in social media and in how people say that this is going to be money of the future. So this is great. But a big thank you, both Jacob and Mark, for stimulating and thoughtful conversation. And thank you to the audience for coming and for your questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to all of them, but watch for the announcements for upcoming webinars at insights.bu.edu and Cicillo Institute. We have also launched Insights podcast that I'm sure you will enjoy, about current topics in business with BU people and others. And I just want to thank you again for all, and have a great day and a joyful holiday season.